And when you're ready, open your eyes. Our presenter today is Jana Weiss. Jana practices acupuncture and teaches mind science in New York. She holds a PhD from the University of Texas in biological sciences. Jana is also a human rights activist and blogger. She works for peace, for Tibet, and also for the rights of people with developmental and psychosocial disabilities, or those perceived to be so. Jana began studying Tibetan Buddhism with Dharma Friends of Israel in 2005. She is an advisory board member of Walter Semke's Reincarnation Research website. Jana offers courses and is passionate about 16 guidelines. She facilitates FTCW's Unlocking Your Potential course, and we are delighted to have her to present to us today. So I'm going to hand over to Jana now. Thank you.
Share the screen. You can see this? Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank Victoria and Angela and Michaela and FTCW and FPMT and for inviting me and for everyone who is here and who has signed up to be here to watch this afterwards. Thank you so very much. There's so many I'd like to thank. Geshe Khalsen Wangmo once recommended taking a look at one of these documentary videos about the boy who lived before, the boy from Bara, and that started me looking at this information. The subject is vast, and so I'm only going to share just a little bit and hopefully just whet your appetite to take a closer look at the science of reincarnation. And I'd like to thank Lobra and Yujin Wangmo for two book clubs on the science of reincarnation in 2020 that got me reading more as well. And to the countless tulkus who have shared their compassion and wisdom with me. So first I'd like to say, following people who are much wiser and more compassionate than myself, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that there are at least two kinds of scientists. And I consider that the Indo-Tibetan mind scientists are experts at rebirth and reincarnation. The Western scientists are busy looking for previous personalities, while the Tibetan mind scientists are forward-looking, finding rebirths for the last 800 years of spiritual masters since the first Karmapa. And before the invasion of Tibet, there were 4,000 reincarnation lineages or rebirth lineages. I'm using the word reincarnation because that's the term used in the West. The Buddhists prefer rebirth being perhaps more accurate. And since the invasion of Tibet, it has been more difficult to recognize the tulkus in Tibet. And so there are 400 recognized lineages still in India today, which is still extraordinary. Here's His Holiness the 6th Kyabje Yomjin Ling Rinpoche, who passed in 1983, and His Eminence the 7th Kyabje Longting Ling Rinpoche, who was born in 1985. So let's see. So if you have never seen any of the beautiful videos about the tulkus, the mind scientists of Tibet, I would recommend at least watching Nati Baritz's documentary that was 5 years in the making. I can't see everything here. Oops. Let's see. Geshe Denzin Sopa went looking for Geshe Lama Konchok and found him, and His Holiness and Lama Sopa Rinpoche are featured in this film. So first a quote, just to acknowledge the Tibetan mind scientists. How do I make this go away here? Rebirth is based on the continuity of consciousness, with each moment of mind connected to the preceding and subsequent moments as members of the same causal continuity. It is through the continuity of the stream of mind that memories, habits, karmic energy, and so forth are preserved. At death, the mind stream continues on, assuming the support of a new physical body. This impersonal process occurs without a findable self. A person is nominally identified because there is a causal continuity of the aggregates. And that's from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Shodro on Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions. I'm not sure how to go forward here. So, from the Western scientists, the strongest evidence for reincarnation is past life memories of children. And the researcher par excellence, who spent over 45 years researching past life recollection memories of children, was Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. Dr. Ian Stevenson lived from 1918 to 2007. He was born in Canada, and he became the head of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia from 1957 to 1967, at which point Chester Carlson, who invented xerography, started funding Stevenson's research, and he established a division of perceptual studies. It was originally known as the Division of Parapsychology Studies, and then the Division of Personality Studies, and now it's known as the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, and is currently headed by Jim Tucker. So in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, September 1977, most of the journal was dedicated to Stevenson's research, and one of his critics said either Dr. Stevenson is making a colossal mistake or he will be known, I said as much to him, as the Galileo of the 20th century. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama met with Ian Stevenson in 1979. Here you can see Ian Stevenson in between His Holiness and Jeffrey Hopkins in the foreground. And the photo is taken by Edwin Roseberry. This is Ian Stevenson doing his field work in some country of Asia or Southeast Asia, either Thailand or Burma or Sri Lanka. And he did meticulous interviews, very detailed interviews, not only of the children, but of everybody around the child. And he discarded and didn't keep cases that had fewer than some number of statements that the child needed to make about the previous lifetime. So he kept only very strong cases for his database. And then he validated the veracity of the child's statements by asking other people around if they had heard these statements and what the child had said. And usually these very young children at the ages of 2, 3, as soon as they start talking, will start talking about their previous lives. A child 2 or 3 years old may say, when I was big, I drove a truck, or you're not my mother, I want to go to my real mother, or this house is too small, my house is much bigger, or before I came to you, I lived near the sea. Statements like this referring to some previous lifetime. Ian Stevenson published 300 journal articles, 14 books from 1960 to 2006, and he died in 2007. And he created this database, this collection that had over 2,600 of these very strong cases, about half of which are deemed solved, where he was able to find the previous personality. He was helped by many collaborators all over the world. He traveled, his first cases were in India, and he traveled to Burma, to Thailand, to Sri Lanka. Dr. Pasricha at the National Institute of Mental Health was one of his collaborators. Antonia Mills, who co-authored a book on Amerindian, co-edited a book on Amerindian rebirth with Richard Slobodin. Researched First Nations and British Columbia and northwestern Canada, specifically the 6 that I highlighted more or less in their areas: the Tlingit, the Haida, I don't know how to pronounce Giksan, Wet'suwet'en, Beaver, and the Gwich'in or Eastern Cochin. and my apologies for not knowing how to pronounce these. And Dr. Erlander Haraldsson at the University of Iceland was one of Stevenson's collaborators. He spent a lot of time in India and in Lebanon, working with the Druze, and in Turkey. And he passed recently in 2020. And he co-authored a book with James Matlock, I Saw a Light and Came Here, Children's Experiences of Reincarnation. And James Matlock is an anthropologist who wrote this, in 2019, he published Signs of Reincarnation, which he deems to be a college textbook, which is a huge collection of all of the research, basically from prior to Stevenson in the West and everything since then. He has 50 pages of references, and it's a really detailed book. So there are cases from all around the world where children remember their past lives. The Druze live in northern Israel, southern Lebanon, Syria, and the Golan Heights is currently under Israeli occupation, and the Alawi are a kind of Shiite Muslim, and also among Shiites you'll find belief in reincarnation. And Matlock points out that it's not the belief that precedes the evidence, but it's the evidence that precedes the belief. And so we have Alawite in Syria and in Turkey. The blue color is in Turkey. In Brazil, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Hernani G. Andrade. He passed in 2003, and he wasn't a collaborator of Stevenson's, but he used Stevenson's methods, and he had many interesting cases of past life recollection of children, including instances of xenoglossy, where children speak a foreign language. And Jim Tucker now continues and is the director of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. And he's concentrating now on United States cases, saying if 2,600 of these cases from all around the world haven't persuaded people, maybe we should focus on the United States and get people's attention. So here are some of the books some of the 14 books that Stevenson wrote. 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation was his first book in 1966. And then this 4-volume series, Cases of the Reincarnation Type, Volume 1, India, Volume 2, Sri Lanka, Lebanon and Turkey, and Thailand and Burma. And then he also wrote European Cases of the Reincarnation Type. About 70% of children who remember their past lives remember their deaths, and they recall specifically traumatic, violent deaths. It seems that traumatic deaths, people who experience traumatic deaths may be more likely to remember their previous lifetimes. And 35% have phobias related to their death, and 90% return to the same geographic area or community or culture where they lived or died. And the children exhibit not only memories, but also different behaviors. Phobias is just one example. For example, if a child died in a fire, they might be terrified of fires, or if they died in a war and heard loud noises, then they might be terrified of loud noises. Birthmarks and birth defects related to death and illness are considered Ian Stevenson's magnus opus. He wrote these 2 volumes published in 1997 with 2,268 pages, Volume 1 on birthmarks and Volume 2 on birth defects. And in the same year, this abridged version was published where reincarnation and biology intersect. And there were 225 solved cases where the previous personality was identified. And Stevenson would go to autopsy reports and postmortem reports wherever he could find them. He would track them down to find out information about the wounds of the person who died and found corresponding birthmarks on the children. This article was published in 1993 and it preceded this 2-volume work. Birthmarks and birth defects corresponding to wounds on deceased persons. In 43 of 49 cases in which a medical document, usually a postmortem report, was obtained, it confirmed the correspondence between wounds and birthmarks or birth defects. So this is an extraordinary contribution of Ian Stevenson. So here's an example of a young boy, 17 years old, and he has this hypopigmented area. In other words, it has less coloration on his chest, and he remembers being killed by a shotgun fired at close range. And when Ian Stevenson and an Indian physician examined the post-mortem report, they found that the shotgun wound was on the chest in the same area as the hypopigmentation. Stevenson found 18 cases with 2 birthmarks. The likelihood of 2 birthmarks is minuscule. In 10 of these cases, 9 that he studied and 1 that Antonia Mills reported, the wounds corresponded to small entry and large exit wounds of bullets. So this Chanai Chumalaiwang was born in Thailand, and he remembered having been a school teacher and riding his bicycle to school. And he wasn't just a pure-hearted school teacher; he was evidently also engaged in some kind of nefarious activities. So someone had it in for him and shot him when he was on his bicycle going to school. And in his life as Chanai Chumalaiwang, he remembered being a school teacher. He would organize the children in his neighborhood and say that he's a teacher. And Stevenson was able to locate a small wound that corresponded to the entry wound and a larger wound that corresponded to the exit wound of the bullet. There was no post-mortem report for Buakai, for the person who died, but there were witnesses who saw the body when he was shot. And this is another example of very unusual birth defect where there's no even residual bones or digits. The bone is totally missing on the right hand. And this boy remembered in a previous lifetime that he had lost his hand in a food chopper that his father was operating. So these birth defects are very unusual. And this girl, I believe in Burma, remembers a previous lifetime where she was killed on a train track and the train severed her leg. And she was born with a totally missing leg below the knee, which is another very unusual kind of birth defect. There's another kind of birthmark that Stevenson called experimental birthmarks, and it is common or practiced in some countries in southern Mongolia, Thailand, Burma, Japan, India, to mark the cadaver, to mark the body after the person dies. And this particular picture to the right, this little boy named Chloe, who's featured in one of these short documentary videos, remembers being his grandmother in a previous lifetime. And one of the family members had painted with some white paste on the nape of the grandmother's neck. And when Chloe was born, he talked about having been his grandmother. His grandmother had also said that she would be reborn as a boy. And so these marks vary in color based on the different materials that are used. In Burma, it's customary to use the black soot at the bottom of a pot. In Japan, they use sumi ink. Stevenson reported one case where women accompanied a female deceased person to cremation, and they marked her body with red lipstick. And that the child who remembered being that woman was born with a red birthmark. Tucker and Keel found 18 more cases of these experimental birthmarks. In Jim Tucker's second book, Return to Life, he actually mentions reincarnation from animals to humans. And when I read that, my eyes kind of popped out of my head. So I thought people here might be interested to hear about that. In one case that I won't describe, in Thailand, a little girl named Yin Yin was born with experimental birthmarks that her aunt had marked on the grandmother's body. And the aunt related, Yin Yin is the little girl's name, she told Jim Tucker that and Stevenson, the one who marked her grandmother's body, told us that she had also marked a dog one time. A boy was subsequently born in that family with birthmarks on his leg that matched the ones that she had made on the dog. So I went looking for birthmarks in dogs and found this image, but this particular kind of marking might not be raised moles like in this picture. The strongest case for reincarnation from animal to human, I'll actually read from Jim Tucker's book. One strange case in Thailand is an exception to the unverifiable cases from animals to humans. Ian Stevenson was traveling with Francis Story, and someone gave them a booklet, an associate of his, a research associate of his, and gave him a booklet about the case of a boy who claimed to have been a python in a previous life. And Ian Stevenson thought it was a waste of time, it was too far away, too much money. But after Ian left Thailand, Francis Story went to the site, and he deemed this story to be quite authentic. He talked with the boy, his parents, and his older sister. He was unable to talk to a key figure in the case, a Mr. Hugh, H-I-E-W, because the way to his village was underwater and impassable. But Hugh had been interviewed for an article in a newspaper, the Bangkok Times. The boy named Dalawang claimed he had been a deer in a past life and that he had been killed by a hunter, and then he had taken rebirth as a snake. And that just before Dalawang was conceived, his father had eaten that snake meat when it was served to him by an acquaintance who had killed a python after an extended struggle. When Dalawang was 3, that same acquaintance, this Mr. Hugh, H-I-E-W, came to a party at the house next to Dalawang's family. Neither Dalawang nor his mother had met him before. When Dalawang saw him, he became infuriated and tried to find a hammer or a stick to use to attack him. He said Mr. Hugh had killed him when he was a snake and gave details of how the killing occurred. These were ones that Dalawang seemingly had no way of knowing, involving a particular cave and a fight between a snake and 2 dogs, followed by a confrontation with the owner of the dogs who killed the snake. And Hugh confirmed that all the details that Dalawang related were correct. Dalawang said that after he was killed, his spirit saw his future father and thought he was kinder than the other men who ate snake meat. He followed him home and soon entered his mother's body. His father reported that when Dalawang met Hugh, he touched him on his left shoulder and said he had been bitten by a snake there. So Dalawang knew where this man who had killed the snake had been bitten. His father said that Hugh did indeed have a scar at that spot from a snake bite. Dalawang got over his initial anger toward Hugh, and he thought it was much better to be a human than a snake. At some point, he went around killing snakes, trying to free them from their miserable lifetime as a snake, but eventually he stopped. Another researcher, Jürgen Kiel, who looked at experimental birthmarks with Tucker, visited Dalawang 20 years after Francis Story met him, and Dalawang still believed he had been a snake in his last life. He continued to visit the cave where the snake had been killed. He would go there every couple of months and meditate. During his meditation, he obtained information about using herbs to help the sick, and he was recognized in his village at that point as a local doctor. And Dalawang was born with ichthyosis, and this is not a picture of Dalawang's legs, but Dalawang's lower extremity from about the waist down had this scaly condition. You might say that it made his skin look snake-like. So this is a picture of ichthyosis, and you can see this scaly kind of skin. So that's the story of Dalawang. And Jim Tucker relates one more story about an American boy. And if you look in Matlock, Signs of Reincarnation, he lists several other cases from animal to human reincarnation that I haven't explored. Anyway, Jim Tucker describes, I received recently an email from an American mother writing about her son, Peter. One day when he was 6, she gave him a candy necklace. He told her, when I was a chimpanzee, a boy threw one in my cage. I didn't know what to do with it. She asked him how he got in the cage, and he described falling into a trap and being taken to a zoo. She also asked what happened after he died as a chimp, but before he got into mommy's stomach. He only answered nothing. And after that, he never spoke again about about his previous lifetime as a chimpanzee. And looking online now for this talk for birthmarks of dogs, do dogs really have birthmarks and what do they look like? I found this extraordinary case from the 27th of February, 2020, where Miss Wang, the Chinese Miss Wang, said that her Samoyed dog died the day that she got pregnant. And the dog had a scar on his left wrist or forearm. And when her baby was born, her baby had a birthmark at the exact same place as the dog. So she believes that her baby is this dog. It will be interesting to see if this child talks about a previous lifetime as a dog. So there's another unusual behavior that's associated with past life memories of children. Wikipedia will tell you that there is no scientific evidence that xenoglossy is an actual phenomenon. Xenoglossy is the speaking of another language that a child isn't exposed to in this lifetime. Dr. Stevenson wrote 2 books about xenoglossy, one in 1974 and another in 1984. Walter Semkiv has includes some of Stevenson's xenoglossy cases in his book, Born Again. So this little boy is a Druze boy from the Golan Heights, where belief in reincarnation and people recognizing their previous lifetimes was very, very common. He was born on May 24th, 2014, and I found him online. And there are 2 kinds of xenoglossy. One is recitative, where children can only say names, but they can't actually communicate in the language and say whole sentences, versus responsive xenoglossy. But O'Neill, who was growing up in an Arabic-speaking household, has both glossophobia, which is related to xenoglossy. It's a difficulty or resistance to learning one's native language in children who remember their previous lifetimes. And he speaks English. So it just sounds like an ordinary kid speaking English with a slightly British accent. So I'll play for you. O'Neill doesn't have normal language acquisition, and at age 2, he wasn't speaking at all. And his parents were worried and started taking him to experts. And then somewhere around age 2, let's see, can you see this? Can you see that? No. Can you see this share? I hope so. This is O'Neill speaking gibberish at age 2. He didn't start speaking Arabic. Can you see this? I don't know if you can see this. And this is O'Neill just speaking English.
Where are you going now, O'Neill?
And shopping to buy Kinder Surprise.
Which candy do you like?
White and red.
What?
White and red. The Kinder Surprise.
Kinder Surprise.
Yes.
Oh.
So I won't show any more of O'Neill, but it is quite extraordinary. He was studied by a linguist, by an expert in Arab language, and he doesn't have normal grammar acquisition and normal speech. Another example is xenoglossy. Wait a minute. Another example of xenoglossy is described in this book by Biko Analayo, with the foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Damaru Wan remembers being a Nalanda monk that came to Sri Lanka, and he does Pali recitation. I don't know if you want to hear that for just a few seconds.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa evam me sukam ekam samayam bhagava
How to stop that?
viharati isipatane nigadaye tantra ko bhagava panchavakya.
There we go. Okay. So, let's see. So I'd like to share with you a few stories. I don't know how we're doing for time. Let's see. I need some help here.
We're good for time, Jana.
Okay.
Yeah, please continue. It's fascinating. Thanks.
So I'd like to share a few stories, a few cases that are rather extraordinary. One is the story of the reincarnation of Anne Frank, Barbara Carlin. And Barbara Carlin was born. She was born in 1954 in Göteborg in Sweden, or Gothenburg, Göteborg in Sweden, about 9 years after Anne Frank died in Bergen-Belsen in Germany. And from the youngest age, from before she could speak, she had these terrifying nightmares of people in brown uniforms breaking in the door, coming in with dogs, hiding under the bed, being absolutely petrified. And as soon as she could talk, when she was 2 years old, she told her mother, my name is Anna, my name's not Barbara, and you're not my real parents, and my real parents are coming to get me. And as you could see from Ian Stevenson's research, this is classic case of a child remembering her previous lifetime. And she remembered being Anne Frank, and in 1954, the diary of Anne Frank had not yet been translated to Swedish. So her parents hadn't heard of Anne Frank. And she talked about Anne Frank. They took her when she was 6 years old to a psychiatrist. But by that point, she'd already learned that adults feel very uncomfortable when she talks about her previous lifetime. So she didn't say anything to the psychiatrist and just said a normal child. And she started, when she learned to read and write at age 7, she just never stopped writing. And she was a child prodigy author. And her first book was published when she was 12 years old. When she was 11, a family friend visited her home and saw that she had pieces of paper shoved everywhere in the shelves and balled up in drawers and in the closet. And she would write and throw away. From the time she was 7, she just never stopped writing. And her first book was published, a book of poetry, when she was 12 years old, called Man on Earth. And it became an instant bestseller, and it's the best-selling book of poetry in all the history of poetry books in Sweden. And here's a clipping of her at age 13 with another bestseller. And by the time these other stories, When the Storm Comes and A Moment in the Blossom Kingdom, were also some of her early writings that were translated into English. And by the time she was 18, she had 10 or 11 books published. When she was in elementary school, about 8 years old, all of a sudden she heard her teacher talking about Anne Frank, because by then the diary had been translated. And she thought it was really strange. How could the teacher know about Anne Frank when she's Anne Frank? But then as she listened, she realized that Anne Frank was famous, and that the diary was famous, and that it really wasn't a good idea to walk around telling people that she was Anne Frank. When she was 10 years old, her parents took her on a tour of European cities. They went to Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam. When they got to Amsterdam, her father said, "Let me call a taxi, we'll go to the Anne Frank house." And she said, "We don't need a taxi, it's not far." And they said, "Well, how do you know? You've never been here." And she said, "Well, I'll take you there." And she walked through them through the narrow, windy streets of Amsterdam. And when they were a block away, she said, "We're almost there." And when they approached the Anne Frank house, she said, "Oh, they changed the steps. The steps are different." And they went inside, and she took her mother's hand, and her hand was icy cold, sweating. Her mother said, "Are you sure you want to go upstairs?" And she said, "Yes." And when they went upstairs, when they came to the annex to Anne Frank's room, she saw all these film stars on the wall and song stars. And she told her mother, "Oh, look, all the film stars, all the pictures are still there." She felt like she'd come home. And her mother looked at the wall and said, "What pictures?" And Barbara looked at the wall and realized that there were no pictures on the wall. And she started crying. And her mother said, "Let me ask the Anne Frank guide." And she asked the Anne Frank guide, "Have there been any pictures here on the wall?" And she said, oh, yes, Anne Frank put up these pictures of film stars and song stars, and people were touching them and damaging them. So 2 weeks ago, we took them down, and we're going to have them framed, and we're going to make sure that they're kept safe, and we're going to put them back. And at that point, her mother, that was her mother's realization that her daughter really was Anne Frank, that she was having memories, that she had seen a memory of the film stars and song stars on the walls of the photographs, because there was nothing there when they were there together. And Barbara felt very, very uncomfortable. She said, let me go outside, I'll wait for you outside. And she went down the stairs, and when she reached the bottom of the stairs, she had this image that was like so vivid of a man in uniform attacking her, and she collapsed outside. And there were tourists there. Her parents came down and got her. Her father was very distressed, never talked about it again. And then her mother became very spiritual after that and very close to Barbara, because she realized after all these years, now Barbara was 10, that she really was Anne Frank. And Anne Frank had a child when she was 19. She got married at 18. She got divorced. She had a child at 19. When she was 23, she decided it was be irresponsible to just live off of the royalties of her books, and that she should learn a profession. And she really loved horses, which is an expensive hobby. And she had this terrible phobia of uniforms. And so she thought she'll combine and deal with her fear of uniforms by becoming a mounted policewoman. And for over a decade, she trained the young horses for the mounted police, which was a dream job for her. And in 2019, she was prescribed a drug for 10 days for shingles, and she lost all kidney function. And so right now, Barbara is on dialysis, and she is asking for our prayers. She's looking for a donor or for spontaneous healing, because there are rare instances of people who do come off dialysis. And for years, she competed in dressage. And when she was in the police force, she started being persecuted by her fellow police officers. And she really didn't understand. Her nightmares had stopped when she was 15. She had had about 15 blissful years without any nightmares. And then her nightmares started recurring at night. And during the day, she found herself subject to a smear campaign of persecution. And eventually she had a vision of the last days of Anne Frank. And she realized that the people who were persecuting her were connected to the last days of Anne Frank in Bergen-Belsen, where she was killed. So then she wrote her book, and The Wolves Howled. She decided to come out with her story, which was very brave of her. She has 2 film scripts and would like to find a producer-director for her film scripts. One is in the Blossom Kingdom, and one is her true story of her life as Anne Frank. This is another extraordinary case. This is an American case that was featured on ABC Primetime in 2004. The father, an evangelical Christian, didn't believe at all in reincarnation, and his 2- and 3-year-old son was having these terrible nightmares, night after night, just kicking and screaming and saying, James Leininger is the son, born 1998, and he was, and eventually the father researched and found that he was who the previous person was that James Leininger had been, which was this World War II Air Force pilot. And James Leininger, from the youngest age, was totally obsessed with airplanes. He just loved model airplanes. He breathed airplanes. He knew everything about airplanes. They would get some model airplane, and his mother said, oh, this looks like a bomb underneath. And he said, no. And he could barely pronounce the word. He said, it's a drop tank, or drop tank. And she was like, what's a drop tank? And he, sorry. And at night, when he had these nightmares, when he was finally able to speak about them, he said, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. And he kept drawing these pictures of a plane being hit in the front, in the nose, and the propeller, and crashing down. And he would sign them James III. His father didn't believe anything to do with previous lifetimes. And actually went about trying to disprove what his son was saying. And eventually the grandmother sent the mother a book by Carol Bowman, Children's Past Lives, How Past Life Memories Affect Your Child. And Andrea Leininger reached out to Carol Bowman, was able to get some advice on how to deal with the nightmares. Well, he kept talking. James Leininger kept talking. One time, his father was flipping through a book and saw a picture of Iwo Jima. And James, who was then 3 or 4 years old, said, that's where my plane went down. He's like, your plane? Who? The father's like, who shot your plane? And he said, the Japanese. Like, don't you get it? Like the Japanese. And he talked about these Corsairs, that he flew a Corsair and that it would take off from a boat. And the father said, a boat? What was it called? He said, Natoma. And the father's arguing, oh, Natoma, that's a Japanese name. And he's like, no, that's a U.S. name. And the Corsairs would take off from the Natoma Bay. And so the father kept researching. And eventually they asked him, did you have any friends? And he said, yes, Jack Larson. And eventually the father reached out to the survivors of the Natoma Bay, who went to a reunion and lied a little bit and said he's just writing a book about the Natoma Bay and the history of the Natoma Bay. He didn't want to say that he was researching his son's reincarnation stories. I'm not sure I can do this too much longer. And so eventually they found that there was only one plane that went down at Iwo Jima. And that was this James Houston, who was James Houston Jr. And James Leininger, who was also James, would sign his pictures James III. Eventually, they also the parents contacted James Houston's sister, who accepted that James Leininger was the reincarnation of her brother who had died. And he also met his friend Jack Larson, who was still alive. And after this program aired on primetime, the Japanese invited James Leininger to come out to Iwo Jima, and they did a little memorial service, and he threw a bouquet of flowers into the water. And after that, he had closure, and he no longer had burning airplane drawings, but had peaceful drawings of planes in the sky and fish swimming in the ocean. And here's just one more a recent book. It came out in 2017, The Boy Who Knew Too Much. This is another prodigy, child prodigy, a Christian Hop. Just his parents had nothing to do with baseball, and he just insisted from the youngest age, from age 2, to wear only baseball uniforms. And all day long, both his parents had to pitch him foam balls, because all day long, all he wanted to do was bat baseball. And so she posted a video of her child prodigy, a baseball player, eventually got invited to some movie scene, and they went to Fenway Park where there was a big picture of Babe Ruth. And this little boy, I think by then he was 3 years old or 4 years old, said to his mother, that man was mean to me. So then his mother started getting photographs of the Yankees and asked, which one were you? And he pointed to Lou Gehrig. And he's the reincarnation of Lou Gehrig. I'd also like to mention that Carol Bowman has written 2 beautiful books. This is her second one, Return from Heaven. And it's really interesting to read a Western perspective on karma. This is all about what she calls family return, about reincarnation within the same family. Grandparents coming back as children, or the same child coming back to the same mother. She has this fascinating chapter called U-Turn in the Womb, with different cases of children who remember the intermediate state and remember that they were either miscarried who were boarded during pregnancy before they came back. And then Sam, Carol calls Bobby Hodges Sam in her book, jumped up in bed and started counting on his fingers. First, I was in Aunt Molly's tummy and I didn't get born. Then I tried to get back into Aunt Molly's tummy, but Sophie, that's his cousin, was there in the way. So I tried to kick her out. Then I got in your tummy and then I got born. He paused and then said in all seriousness, I sure did work hard getting here, Mom. Sam, or Bobby's first word was cousin. Sam was obsessed with his cousin since he was a baby. And the obsession is quite incredible. And I'd like to share some other discoveries as I was putting this together. Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies just awarded 29 prizes for essays on the survival of human consciousness after permanent bodily death. The Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies was founded in 2020, and it has this incredible collection of articles on the continuity of consciousness that you can explore. And here's just a little cartoon. Yeah, well, I didn't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either. So here are just some stories, and just there's a lot that I didn't share. And let's see. Where do I stop this? What happens now?
Thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I'm just blown away by the amount of information that you've shared and the detail of the presentation you put together and all of the resources and the research that's been, I had no idea about any of this. And the fact that it's so prolific and it's happening in different parts of the world, not just one scientist or two, but there are quite a few who've researched this. And all of the stories you shared that are so memorable. And the fact that you've shared images and evidence, I just find it really, really interesting. And I want to thank you very much for putting this together for us, this caliber of presentation, and that I've learned so much. And I know you're not feeling too great, and I heard you coughing a bit. So thanks so much for just offering this anyway, even though you're not feeling 100%.